Hi everyone, welcome to our event. This event is brought to you by DataTalks.Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events. Well, lately they're not so weekly, but we're getting back on track. And this week we will actually have two events. Anyways, so if you want to find out about all the events we have in our pipeline, which is currently I think two, there is a link in the description. Go check it out. And I think I should already update this number because we have more than 50K subscribers. And if you want to become one of them, so there is this subscribe button. Don't forget to click on that. And very important, we have a Slack community where you can hang out with other data enthusiasts. During today's interview, you can ask any question you want. There is a pinned link in the live chat. Click on that link, ask your questions, and we will be covering these questions during the interview. That's all the intro. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Actually, I must admit we haven't had the podcast interviews like in a while, maybe in a month. We're getting back on track, so don't worry. We will have soon a lot of new stuff. But today we have Raphaël, and if you're ready, we can start.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Bring the questions. And yeah, so this week we'll talk about MLOps. And we have a very special guest today, Raphaël. Raphaël is a leader in the MLOps space with background in data science and machine learning. You must have seen him on LinkedIn, where he regularly shares content on MLOps. I see him daily. I don't know how often you post, but like every time I open my LinkedIn feed, I see your face there, which, as we found out, is AI generated, right? So now everyone knows. So Raphaël is currently leading a team of engineers at Enesco, which is a major sustainable energy provider. And yeah, welcome to our interview.
Hey, yeah. Hi, Alexi. Thank you so much for having me today. Good to be here.
Yeah. It's a big pleasure. And for the record, like we've been trying to do this for quite some time, but finally this day has happened. And the questions for today's interview are prepared by Johanna Bayer. As always, thanks Johanna for your help. And before we go into our main topic of MLOps, let's start with your background. Can you tell us about your career journey so far?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working in the data space for about 10 years now, just over 10 years it's coming. And I've done a few different things. I started as a data scientist. And yeah, it was quite challenging for me to get into the field. There were lots of things to learn. And I wasn't sure if I could do it, and I just sort of kept grinding. And
What did you do before that?
yeah, so something a bit different. The 5 years before I worked, I've been working, I guess, for just over 15 years now. I worked in sustainable agriculture. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I did a few different things. First, I was a project manager and a lobbyist for a green organization.
Mhm.
So
So
lobbying was
completely not IT related, right?
no, in the end, it was. I saw some
Uh-huh.
things in the big project that they really lacked good administration of their data, like lots of farmers having all kinds of data on their crops that was super important to improve quality and sustainability. But it's mostly paperwork or on old machines. So yeah, that planted some seeds, no pun intended, in my mind. Like, oh, there's work to be done here. And then in the end, I was working on innovation in agriculture and food, like the last year. And one of the topics we focused on, like me and my business partner, is actually technology in agriculture and food, and mostly IT and data. So that's really what got me into the field. So I went from sort of project manager and campaigner to consultant, just freelancing, and then I was like, hey, there's something to this. I'll try to do something with data in the field of agriculture and food, which was quite challenging because it's yeah, in some countries it is a highly technological sector, but IT and data wise, I would say they're a sector that's mostly following. So I tried to do the hardest projects first, I think. Yeah, and then at one point, I was working for a client and we did proof of concept, right? Like 10 years ago, all data science, it was all proof of concepts. And the client said like, yeah, we quite like this. Can you put it in production for us?
Mhm.
And I was like, what do you mean production? Yeah, like production. I didn't even know what that was. So I did some research and learned some IT concepts. So I was like, wow, if I want to do something in this field, I have to learn more about these types of things. So I ended up joining a IT consultancy. It was just like a
Mhm.
Microsoft Platinum partner doing everything in the Microsoft stack. So quite interesting. We had everything in the house. They call it IT consultancy, but it is IT implementation. And there, my data career started, and I worked as a data scientist in a data analytics team, which was mostly doing BI engineering. So this is data engineering and dashboarding. And we were about 3.5 data scientists on a little island in a team of
3 and
50.
a half.
Yeah, yeah. Like one was a bit more on the data engineering side as
Uh-huh.
well. So that was challenging. And then I moved to another consultancy, which was much more data science focused, which was nice. I worked there for a couple of years, became a lead data scientist, learned about putting stuff in production. And then one of the lessons I was taught in consultancy is that everything takes time. So most of our clients we were serving at like a year or 2 years tops. And I saw that data science projects took more time to finish them end to end from ideation to something running in production. So I decided to join a company just internally. And that's where I started getting introduced to MLOps.
Mhm.
So we had lots of great models there. They were adding lots of business value, and they were really well developed, like by data scientists talking to the business stakeholders, engineering some really clever features, and like, yeah, we were making money and mitigating risk, but everything was running as a sort of, yeah, spaghetti script style setup on an old R server. So yeah, I got a chance there to uh, give it a bit of a lift and shift, implement some best practices. Got lucky to work with like a really clever guy who was helping us once every 2 weeks. And then I thought like, hey, this MLOps thing, I quite like it. And I also felt I could add more value there because so many of the data science projects fail. And then, yeah, what was it all for, right? Some learnings. And I saw that with the MLOps projects, we were not always adding value, but most of the time. And the engineering side, I also quite liked. So then I started getting into MLOps, and I guess that's about 3 years ago now. Time's going fast. So yeah, I worked there for a couple of years, and then a year ago I started freelancing. And here I am. I'm working as a contractor now for my current company. I will become internal soon because, well, you have to after a year, pretty much.
Mhm.
And I'm staying with the company for a while because we're in this big reorganization. I built a team. I've done it a few times in a few different companies, and I feel like there's so much work still to do. Like, yeah, we're not ready yet, and it would be so
Mhm.
nice to just finish it. I mean, it's never finished, but so yeah, not contracting the coming year or 2 years, I
Mhm.
guess, but very happy where I am.
Mhm. Yeah, it's an interesting story. And like you mentioned that you started in agriculture and you're from the Netherlands. And I know that the Netherlands is pretty advanced in this aspect. So I know that it's a relatively small country and half of this is covered with water. Yet, like I can see cucumbers from the Netherlands in pretty much every European country. And I don't know how you managed to do that, right? On such a scale with so little land. Like it's some agricultural marvel probably, but like it's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It's part of the national pride, and you can give it a good spin and you can give it a bad spin. So often we say in the Netherlands, like we're the second largest agricultural exporter in the world. But this is a false statistic because it's also the import going through. When you actually count what we produce, we're actually 22nd in the world, which is still impressive because we are tiny. And
Yeah.
then if you ask me like, how is it possible? It's like, well, we're highly technological. There's a lot of knowledge here from like the seed level and the genes level to producing the crops, growing the livestock. So that's something we're really good at. And then I guess the other side of the coin is that the inputs are like really high. So we take all these
Mhm.
grains, soy, maize, all this
You
stuff.
have to be super effective, right? Super efficient.
Yeah, we take it from the Americas and we feed it to animals, and yeah, in a sense, the footprint is also really high, right? So we have a problem that we have too much manure and air quality
Yeah.
is bad. And so, yeah, you win some, you lose some, I guess.
Mhm.
But I feel if we move forward in the right way, we can be like a
Mhm.
future-proof player. That's still really important.
Yeah. So coming back to MLOps.
Yeah,
So if I
sorry.
open your LinkedIn, and I guess many people who see your posts also open your LinkedIn to just see what you're doing, right? And what you have under your picture, I think it's called slogan or whatever, like the title. So you have some things there, and one of the things say, creating the future's technical depth today. What does it even mean?
Yeah, it's a bit of a joke. Like I couldn't help myself because that's kind of how I am.
You mentioned the
But
spaghetti code that like you had to put in production. I guess this
yeah,
is related, right?
yeah, but it's also a serious take because I feel the world is moving so fast, and yeah, technology is rapidly evolving, especially in our space, that sometimes it almost feels like what we decide to do, and then when we eventually get to implement it, is already a bit outdated. So I think there's a gap between like making a design decision and actually implementing it. And then, yeah, we've chosen this now. Oh, but look at here. There's another tool, or there's another method, or there's another model. Um, so is that technical debt? I wouldn't call it technical debt per se. I would always measure between what you decide to do as an organization and what you actually have, the gap there, that is technical debt. So what you have and what is out there in the world, yeah, no, I wouldn't call that debt, but sometimes it does feel like that.
Mm-hmm. But it's unavoidable, right? So sometimes, like, you want to create a prototype, you want to move fast, and you don't know, like, out of 10 prototypes, how many will actually survive. Maybe it's just one, so you don't necessarily want to invest like a lot of effort into each of those prototypes. But when one goes off, then you know, okay, like, yeah, like I might have cut some corners there, but now, like, I have to. It's kind of running. It proved its value, so now I have to repay the debt, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And these are conversations and decisions. Yeah, we're trying to make the right ones every day, and we have conversations about this every day between tech leads and product managers, but also amongst tech leads. Like some of the ones we're working at now at the NACO, they really have this startup mentality, like cut corners, ship fast. Is this generating value for the customers? And others are a bit more like, well, this is the correct way. Maybe we should do this first
Mhm.
before we deploy to
Maybe we
production.
should
So
stop cutting corners, right, for some things.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So this is an ongoing
Uh-huh.
thing, and the cliche in engineering is like everything is a trade-off, right? And
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
the same is true on a product
Hmm.
level. Yeah.
And when you were talking about your career path, you mentioned that you have built a team multiple times already, so you're building it again. So you have experience in building teams and MLOps teams specifically, if I understand correctly. So why did you choose to focus on teams? Like why teams specifically? Like, and what do teams have to do with MLOps in general?
Yeah, great question. I think for me it was a natural extension of what I was doing in earlier parts of my life. So playing sports, I always really valued like you're better if you're a well coordinated team with a great culture and everyone helps each other. And then I played some computer games, like some really nerdy text-based games as a teenager. And in this one game, we are like a group of 25 people having to work together in rounds of 13 weeks. And again, I invested in the team there so we could perform well. And then I was a student. I worked at an art house cinema. There were like 50 of us running the art house cinema, and I was doing sort of the um, yeah, like the HR part.
Mhm.
And then when I got to data, I was like, well, I've been doing this type of stuff. Feels natural for me to take this role. And
Mhm,
particularly looking at like data science, AI,
mhm,
MLOps, what I noticed is that you really need a good team. Like
mhm,
it's hard to deliver something successfully.
mhm,
And I'm going to mention another cliche story, but it's like if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
mhm,
And I think small teams can be successful and solo people can do a lot. But most organizations I work in are non-tech organizations in the sense that they're like non-IT tech or non-data tech. And then you're trying to do data and IT there. And it can be very challenging. So you need all kinds of different roles to ensure success. And then within your own little group of data people, you really need to be aligned and be able to trust each other and communicate well. And I think when I came in, I saw a lot of focus on the tech always, like how do we do things or what are we building to build the product we want. And in my perception, like lots of the work is process and people work as well. um, and there were a few projects where I focused on the tech, like as a tech lead working with a small team. And then in my experience, in the end we lost, or the project failed, because we had no say in the strategy process part, or people were badly managed, then they leave. It's really hard, in these complex projects when the turnover is too high to offboard and onboard people. So I started focusing more on that part.
mhm. So you mentioned two words, good team, good and team, right? So team is clear, right? So a bunch of people
Yeah.
who do together. But what does make a team good, right? So what kind of people do we need inside the team, and how we? Well, let's start with roles. Like do we need in MLOps team? Like, is it just, I don't know, data scientist, MLOps, ML engineer, data engineer, data analyst, or like how do we even know who we need?
Hmm. Yeah, again, great question, thanks. So I think it really depends on the context. How many people can you hire for such a team? Is it going to be the two of you, or are it going to be
Like,
like
if we can
10
hire 10
people?
people, does it mean we should? Maybe we
Yeah, it
shouldn't.
really it really depends on the context, so the type of organization and the maturity of the organization. I think there are some patterns you can identify. I think one of the roles that is often forgotten is the role of evangelist. So either you need someone really rooting for you, and it can be someone in the team, right? But someone has to have this role. It's not even so much about stakeholder management. It's before that even, and it can be on the side of the team, but it can also be on the leadership side. It can be a sponsor. So it can be a sponsor on the executive level, or just below. And
Mhm.
I think this is
And
super important.
we're talking about non-IT teams, right? So you mentioned non-IT companies where IT is maybe secondary, right? So you said like
Yeah,
there in such companies, success is even lower than in, let's say, traditional IT companies.
yeah,
That's
for
why it's very
sure.
important to have these evangelists.
Yeah, yeah. Or a sponsor on the executive level or just below. Because the question there often is like, does the company have a CTO or a CDO or a CIO, whatever? And if they have one, do they get this particular part? Because they have a lot on their plate, like more than machine learning operations. So I think for both data science and machine learning operations, you need buy-in on that level. Or if you don't have it, you need a really good, yeah, evangelist supporting your cause. And then the team itself, I mean, it's always nice, and in some organizations crucial to have like a good tech translator. It could be a text translator or an analytics translator or both. And this can be your product manager or product owner. But sometimes the roles are split, right? Sometimes maybe the product manager is a bit less technical, and somebody has to do it. Because in
Like a senior
machine,
data scientist, maybe, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there's so many complexities involved in the work that you need to keep explaining them in the right way, so briefly and clearly enough. And you also have to understand your audience as a good translator, because the audience is changing all the time. It's not just the one story you're putting out there. It's like, hey, are we talking to these executives and understanding what makes them tick, and then all the other stakeholders. So these two roles are super important.
Evangelist and the team tech translator, right?
Yeah, and a translator. And again, it could be one and the same person doing those two roles, but yeah, depending on the skill, it can get hard. And then if you look at the team itself, of course, it's nice to have an experienced tech lead, like someone who knows MLOps principles and components well, maybe is a bit more familiar with the stack you're working in. Um, and then, yeah, if you look at the team itself, specifically for MLOps, like it's a luxury if you can split between MLOps engineers who are maybe really focused on building your platform, like doing the infrastructure and automating away all kinds of parts from the machine learning lifecycle, building like little tools around it, interfaces, maybe utility packages. If they can just focus on that, and then on the other part, you might have a machine learning engineer who's working closer with the data scientists or working in the product teams. And this also really depends on the type of machine learning you're doing, I think, because some machine learning engineers, they really need to focus on efficient machine learning in terms of memory, compute, data usage, and costs with that as well. Some models are like 100,000 euros to train, or even more. So this is more like in the big data realm, which is more often unstructured data as well. So you see, yeah, the term machine learning engineer is a bit ambiguous. Also, like when we're getting in resumes, we see like a few different type of categories. So we see a lot of like computer vision machine learning engineers, for example. They're usually a bit more closer to the academic world, and they're really good, but we're working more with tabular data, and we're working in a product organization, so they need to be able to work with like data scientists and business as well. But I think if you can split between these two roles, between MLOps engineers and machine learning engineers, you're in a great position, because what you see in lots of companies is you just see like one centralized MLOps team. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
couple of engineers, they have to build something that works, and then it's hard to get it adopted,
Mm-hmm.
or to have like a good connection with the end users and the business.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe this is something I should have asked even before. What makes a good MLOps team? What is the actual role and focus of the MLOps team? What do they do? Because you mentioned that, okay, we need evangelist, we need translator, we need MLOps engineers, ML engineers, tech leads. You didn't mention data scientists, data analysts. So I assume that the role of this MLOps team is to help other teams, right? Maybe can you
Mm-hmm.
tell us more? What does this team exactly do?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing I often repeat is I think the focus should be on three things: easy deployment, easy maintenance, and easy monitoring. I think those are three key drivers, like for what your MLOps team should deliver. And then there are like a lot of other things they can do. Um, what you see in organizations, what usually goes under the radar is you can actually save a ton of costs as well, which can be a good success to have as an MLOps team, because in most organizations, they are viewed as cost centers. So if you're saving a ton of costs, you're actually, well, generating some money in a sense, which can validate your team from certain perspectives, right? But these three things are really important, I think, like
Mhm,
deployment, maintenance, monitoring.
mhm. So did I understand correctly that this is a central team that helps other teams?
Oh, it depends on the organization, I would say, like the scale, but I think
Yeah.
yeah, it is good to have a central team, and it can be small. I think you need some people dedicated to setting up a platform in terms of infra and tooling.
Because I imagine, like, I don't know in your case what kind of use cases you have, but I imagine that there are different use cases, like demand forecasting, right? Could be
Mhm.
one use case, right? And then maybe another use case could be maintenance of like whatever energy suppliers, right? So it could be another
Yeah,
team. And then yet another team could be doing, um, I don't know, like something else, right? Um,
anything. Yeah,
yeah, so
marketing
you have
intelligence. Yeah,
uh, three, four product teams, right? And each of them might have their own data engineers, data scientists, ML engineers, I don't know, just software
exactly.
engineers, like usual
Yeah,
product teams. But then
yeah.
there is a separate team that helps all these teams when it comes to ML operations, right? So this is the MLOps team. They say, okay, like
Mhm.
we want to make it easier for you to roll out models to production. So we have
Mhm.
MLOps engineers, we have like this ML engineer that can help you with best practices. Is it the kind of setup that you see, or like what do they do? Like what is the difference between like a MLOps team and like just a usual product team?
Um, so we're approaching it from an agile perspective. So we do have a lot of product teams, more than 10 product teams, and exactly like you're describing, like each product team is a mix of different roles, and then people from the business side as well, and then maybe from like web and app development as well. And it's not always the same mix. And then for us, the MLOps team in the agile framework is a little bit more like a platform and an enablement team.
Mhm,
But our team is not just like the handful of MLOps engineers. We're actually like one team together with all the ML engineers. So I think at the
mhm.
moment we have three
Uh-huh,
MLOps engineers and three ML engineers and two
uh-huh,
managers, of which I'm one. So we do it together.
mhm,
And we're working on best practices in terms of like this is how we think it should work, and then we write like design documentation,
mhm,
all the codes and the tools, like the private packages that are being reused. We're sort of doing that together, and
mhm,
now we've come to a stage because if you look at our organization, we're working together with four different departments, and I
mhm,
think we have about 45 data scientists in total, but I'm not sure. There might be more around. And then even more data engineers and data analysts as well.
mhm.
But we're focusing on our current department. And once we have our house in order, we'll fan out to the other departments. But for us, it's really a luxury to have both a centralized MLOps team and the ML engineers working in the teams. Like it's not something I've seen in other places before. So we're in a good spot.
And I imagine if you have like 45, at least 45 data scientists, and data scientists, like usually they're also data science. I so diverse, like there are so many ways to get into data science. You can be like a PhD in physics, you can be software engineer, you can be a data analyst. Like there are so many ways to do this. And then because of that, also the way people write code could be different, right? So the way a
Mhm.
physicist writes code is different from the way a former software engineer writes code, right?
Mhm.
And then you have all these diverse people who create models, right? And then like you end up with like 45 different ways of like having a model, right? And then what you need to do is an MLOps team to say, hey, like how about we try to standardize it and have one or two or three ways of doing that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is one of the interesting and challenging parts of our field. Um, and you have to find a sweet spot because if you don't standardize anything and you just say like, oh, the data scientists do something, they have a notebook or whatever they're doing, and they kind of maybe throw it over the fence or give it to an ML engineer or whatever, you kind of make sure it works. Then you're creating a lot of work. So you do need some frameworks that you want to work in. But if you are too opinionated, it's like, oh, this is this all encompassing MLOps framework, and we have a template that we are enforcing somehow, and only if you adhere to this template or whatever, then we will deploy it for you, and else it doesn't work. Then you kind of lose the larger part of the data science population. In my experience, there's like 25-30% of data scientists that are open to this. It resonates with them. And others are more like, well, I'm already focused on this really complex modeling, and then I have the business, and it's too much for me. So you
Mhm.
have to find a sweet spot in between those two extremes. And you do need some standards, which maybe are a bit opinionated. And then you kind of have to find out together with your data scientist and the data science leads, like, what are the standards going to be, and do they fit into the data science way of working, because they already have their own ways of working in different teams, and maybe across their chapter.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's something you have to be really aware of and delicate about. So I see a lot of small MLOps teams. There's MLOps teams, they're centralized, they're pushing out the standard, and then nobody uses it, right? So there's like, yeah, I don't know, it's taking too much time, and it takes time to build the trust and the relationship. Like, you're adding all these bells and whistles and engineering practices, so you also have to invest that time in terms of not only writing documentation, but like building the relationship and organizing workshops and doing like pair programming, for people to buy in.
How do you standardize when only 25, 30% is on board with, like, only for a third of people the ideas resonate, and like how about the rest, like 70%? Like, how do you standardize in such a way that everyone can use your tools?
Hmm. I think I always say iteration is king. So sort of just like we do in data science, you test,
So you
but you
start with a pilot
mostly,
project, or
yeah, you test, you explore, but mostly you talk to people. So you have to invest time in this. You have to talk to your end users. Data scientists are really important end users, and you have to keep talking and testing and getting feedback. It's going to take some time, and then at one point you meet in the middle, right? You can't please everyone. Um, but I think some parts, are like a no-brainer. You want proper CI for everyone. You want some structure for the repository. You want to maybe package your solutions. So these are things data scientists can do for sure. But then when you look at the actual source code, that's a big question, I think. Like, how opinionated are you there? Are you going to say like, oh, you always need these modules and you always need these functions and they need to be embedded in these classes? And that's a bit of the danger zone, I think, where you start losing people.
yeah. And how do you go about talking and getting feedback? Like, do you just select a few projects that are maybe the most important, or maybe not so important because you don't want to touch the important projects? Like, walk us through the process of like trying to understand what kind of standards we can have as a team, and what kind of standards will get adoption.
From data science side, um, I think, in my current situation, again, like we're in a position of luxury because we have many ML engineers. Um, but if you don't have it, if you're just like an isolated MLOps team, I would really approach it as a product manager, the process itself. So how products get developed for users, you try to develop your MLOps platform in that way for developers. So people talk about user experience, but I think developer experience is a huge driver for success here. Um, so I am not a product manager, but I kind of do it for MLOps, and I think to create the buy-in from the organization, one of the first things you do is you collect the pain points. So what actually are people struggling with? And then you can make a little matrix maybe. It's like, oh, this is what the MLOps lead or whatever, think we should work on. And this is what the others, they or the data scientists or business think we should work on. And then in those matrix, you will have four quadrants. And yeah, you start with the one where you overlap, you agree, just to create some
Mhm.
successes and some wins, even though if you might not think that's the right thing to do first, you need to build trust and prove your value. And then I think what's really important is once you have the pain points, you have to show a clear before and after. So before you start, you have to paint a clear picture. It's like, hey, this is where we are now. I know I'm asking a lot of you now, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take maybe some time of your regular work. But when we do it, look at where we will be. These are the clear gains we'll have. These are the risks we will have mitigated. This is the time we're saving every week or every deployment, every sprint, whatever. This is maybe the money we're saving. And once we save those resources, you actually, the data scientist, will have much more time to do your actual work. Because what you can observe in a lot of organizations that don't do proper machine learning operations is that at some point the data scientists get stuck in operations. So the organization starts doing data science, some cool models or some cool ML systems or solutions get built, a few more, a few more, a few more, and then the data science team starts getting criticized by the business because the pipeline didn't run or something is up, and then, oh yeah, they have to debug and they sort of, what I've seen a lot of people do over the years is they just go through the code, run it like chunk by chunk or cell by cell, and start inserting print statements in between to see what's up. And this takes a lot of time. So a lot of organizations get stuck in at the point where there's like so much ops work, just so much, and you kind of have to show them, it's like, hey, this is where you're going, or this is where you already are. If we start implementing these tools and practices, we're going to free you up again, and you can improve the models, or you can make new ML solutions, which you kind of love doing. Like, you don't like fixing these pipelines, right? Then
Okay.
they're like, yeah, well, let's do it, mate.
So that's why you said you start with pain points, because like there are clearly, as a data scientist, I don't like debugging pipelines, right? And then you kind of figure out, okay, like this is what they don't like. Because otherwise you would risk, like as you were talking, I imagined that you as a platform engineer, you might think, okay, like there is this the best way of deploying models and everyone should just use it. And
Yeah.
then you implement it and people like, oh, we kind of use SageMaker and it kind of works, like it's not really a problem for us.
Yeah.
And then like, okay, you have this fancy thing, but like it's not really solving any pain points of the like product teams, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you start rolling your amazing practices out, and the data scientists will be like, oh, these tests are not accepting what I've just built, or even the pre-commit hooks. Like this, what is this MyPy thing? Like, I can't even merge my code now. Oh, well, that is if they use branches, but and then you lose you lose the buy-in. So you
Mhm.
really have to show what it's going to bring. And from the other side, I think from leadership, one thing that is really important and hard to do in MLOps is people often want KPIs or OKRs. Everyone's like, oh, OKRs these last couple of years, but then they want measurable results. And I think for engineering cost centers, this can sometimes be challenging because from the engineering side, it can feel a little bit like, yeah, but if we weren't here, nothing would work. Why are you bugging us with these KPIs we have to present every month or every quarter? But you have to do it. Like, you have to make
It
things
could be as simple
measurable.
as the number of deployed models through the platform, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So like there are ways to measure that. And I think one of the key points, and this is what we just talked about too, like when it comes to pain points, is like MLOps team is at the end is also a product team, but more like internal product, right? And you
Yep.
need to approach it as such. So
Yeah.
like talk to users instead of assuming what they need, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And we briefly touched what kind of good practices or the set of tools or set of best practices we should have. So you mentioned we should have proper CI. We should have structure for ML repos, and you
Mhm.
mentioned packages, right? Packaging. Is
Yeah.
there anything else that like would be kind of must-haves for when it comes to standardization and best practices?
Yeah, I think it's always good to isolate your parameters. in whatever solutions you're building. So for software engineers, this is maybe like a no-brainer. But I think in data science, it's good that we isolate our parameters.
Probably in a standard way, right? So every team is doing
Yeah,
it like not like one team is using ini files, another team is using YAML files, third team is using
exactly.
local
Yeah,
variables, but like everyone sticks to the same standard.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, then I think, in terms of your testing suite, you can do all kinds of things, and it's hard to get like code coverage, like unit tests for everything you write. But I think whatever you do in data transformation, so the pre-processing and post-processing of your data should always be tested. And this people can actually do on the development side themselves.
Mhm.
Um, then another thing to pay attention to, I think, is when people are developing stuff, they do a lot of data exploration, and there's a lot of knowledge captured in there. And I think the data exploration holds a lot of keys for the monitoring setup. So even if you don't have an advanced monitoring setup, because this is maybe one of the harder things to do, and you're gonna productionize your code, that part disappears. Or, well, before we would just comment out that part of the code, right? It would be like ggplot or something. We comment it out and we don't run it. But I think if you productionize your code, then you want to keep this part, because these are like the keys to root cause analysis. So a really simple part could be like, hey, I saw you had this notebook or whatever, reproductionized it now. Could you maybe just make like an isolated exploration notebook? Because it will help us in the future. Uh, so this is not so much about the productionizing itself.
More
And
like
then,
standards, right? How we organize code. Okay, here we have like this exploratory stuff. Here we have like the deployment stuff. Here we have tests, right? And everything is kind of clear where which thing is.
yeah, for sure. But I think there's a risk of the exploratory stuff disappearing
Ah,
sometimes. And it's like there's productionized code, it's version controlled. But where's this original thing? Yeah, it was on so and so's desktop and they left.
okay,
Uh,
so what you say is like if we have a Git repo, we should just have we just need to make sure that like let's say we have a notebooks folder where we keep our exploratory stuff, even
yeah,
if it's like somewhat messy or like
for
messy,
sure. Yeah,
like we just commit it there, we just push it there.
yeah,
So even if maybe we will never need it, but who knows, maybe we will.
yeah, for sure. There's usually like loads of value in there.
Uh,
So keep it around. Um, yeah, other best practices. I think if you get to a more advanced level, reproducibility and traceability is important. So traceability depends on the sector you're in, the legal framework. But I think reproducibility is interesting, and there's different ways to do it. And like to have something 100% reproducible is hard. But if you can tie the code um, that you used to do a certain deployment to the data versioning, you're already quite good compared to the field. Um, so you need data versioning for that first, of course. But then you just kind of need to know, like, hey, what version of the data is connected to this deployment? Then we can sort of reverse engineer it when we want to know something else. It would be nicer if you had more stuff, like the model artifact or a Docker image. But yeah, again, it's not for everyone. So to really have some like minimal, and I can't call it reproducibility because it's not officially that, but at least to have a lineage there.
And at what point of organization maturity do we need to think about data versioning? Because, like, to me, sometimes it feels like too much. Um, like, if we just want to have a simple model and maybe we don't have a lot of models in our, let's say, portfolio yet. Like, do we really need to care about data versioning from the start, or it's something we can add later?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It can feel like a lot, and I think it really depends on your sector, what you have to do in terms of obligations to your customers, or in the B2B customer domain, or legislation. But yeah, it's not easy. I agree. Yeah.
We have a few questions from the audience. So the first question is it important to first work as a data scientist before moving into MLOps? And maybe here we can also think about like what actually MLOps means in this context and in general, right? Because like,
Mhm.
because I think there is this idea that MLOps is strictly about tools, right? So as a data scientist, I start doing these tools and then I move into MLOps, right? But we also talked about other things that are MLOps related, which is processes, team structure, and all that, right? So with this in mind, like, what do you think? Do we need to work first as data scientists before doing MLOps stuff, or it's not necessarily?
Yeah, you do need these skills in your team.
Uh-huh.
So not everyone has to come from the data science side, but you do need these skills in your team in the mix.
In the MLOps team, right?
Yeah, and then it's good to have a mix of skills, I guess, or maybe previous professions. So MLOps has a lot of overlap with SRE, site reliability engineering, which some people tend to call DevOps, which is interesting. I learned not too long ago that DevOps is a movement. Nobody maybe knows exactly what it is, but SRE is a really well-defined practice. So I started calling this SRE as well, and MLOps has like a lot of overlap with that. So it's useful to have someone from that side. It's also useful to have like good software engineering experience, because I think at the end of the day, as data scientists, we are quite poor software engineers. In general. And then it's funny because some of these skills like SRE, platform engineering, they are actually just called data engineers in a lot of organizations. So yes, people are building data pipelines or maybe doing some data warehousing, but then they're doing a lot more. So it's also yeah quite interesting in many use cases to really look at the data engineers, what they can do, and maybe add like one or two of them to your MLOps team.
Mhm. So in general, like we aim at having a diverse set of skills, having somebody from engineering, having somebody from with platform experience, having somebody with data science experience, right? And then
Mhm.
plus the extra roles that you mentioned. Um, so for a specific individual, it's not important to work as a data scientist before doing MLOps, but there should be somebody in the team with this experience.
Yeah, preferably more than one, but you definitely need this in the mix, I would say. Yeah.
Probably the translator role, right? Is they should have this experience at least to some extent.
Yeah, yeah, that could help for sure. Yeah.
A question from Sam. What will you say is the best place to start in terms of implementing MLOps in a new team? The team has loosely experimented with Vertex AI.
So what was the question? What is the best
Question
place?
is like you want to start implementing MLOps practices in a new team. How do you
Mhm.
do this?
Um, well, I think it's important again from a sort of product management perspective to think about what is most needed in the organization. So what is the challenge you are trying to solve? Um, and I'm not too familiar with Vertex AI. It's just, yeah. But I think, is the requirement that, hey, we have models running in production and we don't really know what they're doing, so we want monitoring. Then you start there, or is the challenge like it's taking so much time to deploy new versions of models? We actually want to deploy a new model every month, but the deployment is taking multiple months. Then you start there. Yeah, it's a hard question to answer without more context. But having said that, I think there's always some low-hanging fruit in MLOps. And like I mentioned earlier, for me, it's always the CI. I think CI you can set up quickly.
So basically, speaking with users, data scientists, asking them about their pain points, right, and going from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you want to start with MLOps, one thing you should do early is you should be aware of the opportunity or not to build MLOps with the tools you have. And if you have tools that you can build it with, you should do it with those tools. Sometimes people want new tools. Depending on the type of company you're in, this can take a lot of time. So if you're in a startup, it's just like, hey, I need this. Can we get the credit card number? Okay, we have it the same day. But in corporate or semi-corporate environments, the procurement processes can take so long. So if you want a particular thing that's better than what you already have, just go with the thing that you have at first. But if you realize that you want to start with MLOps and you actually have nothing to work with, then it's good to realize that early. So if you look at all the different MLOps components, so maybe the first one is version control. If you have absolutely nothing for version control, okay, like flag that straight away with your leadership. Say like, hey, we need to get a subscription to so and so because we want to start.
And another question that came up right now as you were speaking. So you said build MLOps with tools you have. And like I like this build MLOps, and I started to think like, what does it actually mean to build MLOps, and how do we know that we have built MLOps? Like, is there a set of things we need to have to say, okay, we have some MLOps as compared to no MLOps before?
Yeah, great question. So there are a few different frameworks for MLOps, and so last year I was writing with Marvelous MLOps, a blog and content platform, and there is a framework like the MLOps tool belt, and this is the one I like best. Not to pat ourselves on the back, they actually made it before I joined, so a lot of credit to Bashak and Maria who did that. But they just, based on the literature out there, made their own set of components, and it's like, oh, if you have something for all of these, then yeah, you have good MLOps setup in place.
So these are things like experiment tracking or model registry or like monitoring
Yeah,
or
yeah.
deployment.
So just like version control, CI/CD, containerization, model registry, indeed, and different variety of that is indeed experiment tracking. Then there's your container registry as well, monitoring, compute and serve, of course. And something I like to add as well is a package registry. So you have a private package registry with the
Why do we need
packages
that?
you.
Like you mentioned packages multiple times, but like, why do we need to like, let's say I have a project and this is, I don't know, demand forecasting. Why do I need to bother with packaging it as a package and then like can't I just, put it in Docker and call it a day?
Yeah, for sure you can do it, but what I like about packaging is that you can throw a lot of stuff together and package it, so to say. So
But
one of the
what do you mean by
important,
package actually? Like,
yeah,
is
so
it
for
this Python wheel or what?
yeah, exactly. So most of the time, what we do within MLOps is a lot of Python. So it's Python packaging. And then an important part of that is version and dependency management and configuration management. And the current setup of Python packages, it's nice because it lets you configure some of the important stuff in the package configuration. Um, and I think it's a good way to keep your software compatible
But like, why
because
don't we just use Docker?
well, in the end, you can build a Docker image, but what usually happens is you're not working in isolation. So your package might operate on a scope together with different pieces of software, right? So one nice thing about coming from a package side is that you can configure your dependencies So you can loosely define them in your package, for example. So everything that you're importing, so import something in the Python code, you put in the configuration, and you give it a range in terms of versions that's compatible with the other ones you're using. So at the point where all the dependencies are loaded and you sort of pin them and build a Docker image, then you're fine, right? You have a working reproducible thing you can ship. But the point before that, maybe your piece of software needs to work together with other pieces of software, so other packages. And if you have a package defined with ranges, it is compatible with most of the other pieces of software. If you don't have that, if you like pin everything, for example, you might be like the troublemaker because you are trying to use different versions of the same package uh, that are not compatible with each other. Of course, you can also go for a setup where each component is its own container, but yeah, it could create a lot more overhead.
Okay, I imagine that because now when you were talking about that, I was thinking, okay, if everything is its own container, then like everything has its own pandas or whatever, like NumPy, like all this stuff.
Mm.
And when we deploy to our platform multiple models, then each single model has its own bunch of dependencies, and we are kind of well, it adds up quickly, right?
Mhm.
While if we just have packages, then maybe like all of these can have the same version of pandas. I don't know.
Well, hopefully it can be resolved within the
Yeah.
ranges. That's what we
But
try to
like
aim for.
what
But
I understood from you is like there are some use cases where it's just easier to have a package rather than like build a full container.
well, we usually do both. I mean, now we're using Databricks, but we also have a setup with Kubernetes. So we actually use our package to build our Docker image
I see.
and run that. But it depends on the complexity of your setup. So one of the first things I saw as a data scientist in 2019 was someone advocating for a separate Docker image for each logical component of your ML pipeline. So one for data handling, one for pre-processing, one for modeling, etc. And then you can easily swap them out as something changes. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. But I think the question you have to ask there is like, does it make it easier or more complex for teams to be autonomous and for data scientists to use this type of stuff?
I noticed that we have a few questions in live chat. Sorry, I wasn't monitoring
Okay.
live chat. I was just looking at Slido. Maybe we can.
Thanks.
Do you have time for maybe one more question?
I actually have time. I knew we originally needed to finish early, but I do have time. I have like another
Okay.
half hour. Yeah.
Oh, well, hopefully we will not need that much,
Yeah, but
but
just
we
letting you
can
know.
cover multiple questions, right? It's okay for
Yeah,
you?
surely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a question from Svetlana. I'm about to start on data management side, and I like your point about addressing pain points. First, to make people use your solution. Do you have some example of when this worked well and when it failed?
Yeah, so a successful example is something you mentioned earlier, actually, like showing the frequency of deployments and then just showing the business that we're only deploying a few times a year, and then showing them that in the new situation, we can deploy every day.
So for them,
Um,
the deployment was a pain point, right?
yeah, yeah, it was taking ages. Like deployment was taking ages. Also, training in terms of compute, how it was set up was taking ages. Testing was taking ages. Like it just took forever.
Mhm.
So trying to sell MLOps, like, hey, you can all do it within like a few hours. That worked. Um, and when it failed, I mean, yeah, for sure. Once for a client, we built a successful uh, data science solution in a proof of concept. And then for the second part, we sold them a data platform. This was in 2019. So it's like, hey, you need to get a data lake to store the data here. You need to Databricks. It was a bit different back then to run these models. And we successfully sold all of them, these projects, and we built them. But where we failed was they had a sort of integration freeze because they had two failed migrations on like a storage side and workplace side. So the board had decided that no integrations were allowed. So we had like this whole data platform, but it wasn't allowed to connect to data sources. And we could jump high and low and do everything. And we completely failed to convince them. And in the end, we worked there for like 2 years and that was it. No
That
result.
must be quite frustrating.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Like
It
to
was
say
very
the least.
frustrating. Yeah. Yeah, I had two difficult projects in a row, like two times a little under a year, and this was the second one. And after that, I was done for a bit. Like
Mhm,
I also had some challenges in my personal life, but I pretty much burned out on that project.
mhm. Yeah, I can imagine that. Like this is
Yeah,
when there is like a decision that you don't have any power to influence, and
no.
they just okay, we're not integrating. And like, okay, why did I spend 2 years building this thing, right?
Yeah, they made us build something that would run on uploaded CSVs. So
Ah,
that's what we did, but
ah,
that's not what you
I
want.
see. And there is an interesting question which perhaps we should have started with at the very beginning of this episode is what is MLOps in simple terms?
It is the operational part of building machine learning solutions. So you build machine learning solutions, and then they started running in your business. And you have business operations, you have HR operations, and that this is machine learning operations.
So it's basically a set of tools, best practices, right? And other things to make sure that machine learning models run
Yeah, that they keep running. Yeah. In the right way. This is the
in the
tricky
right way.
thing, right? Because the data is changing all the time.
Mhm.
So it's not just the one thing.
Okay, and by just adding in the right way, you just made it so much more complex.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfair compared to other software operations, right? Because of the data part. Yeah.
Mhm. I think you said like the focus of ML ops team is easy deployment, easy monitoring, easy maintenance, right?
Yep.
And
For sure.
this is actually quite difficult to achieve, like all three.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. In
like
most
it has to
cases.
be quite mature to in order to like make it easy to do all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a challenging field. Yeah. You need to know a little bit about a lot and then a lot about a few things. So, yeah.
Okay. Like have T-shaped profile.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for today. So that was a lot of knowledge that you shared with us. Thanks, Raphael, for doing that. I have a lot of notes like I took this. And yeah, and I'm super happy that we finally managed to record this. It's amazing. And like quite a few people joined us. I say it's above average. So thanks everyone for joining us today, asking questions, being active. And again, thanks Raphael for sharing all your experience with us. I hope this thing with like the integration does not happen again in your career because like must be devastating. And yeah, thanks for sharing it with us too.
Yeah, thank you so much for today. Thanks everyone for joining. And I just want to give a big compliment to you and Johanna for the way you do things. Like you prepare so well and like the questions you've prepared and the way you're doing this. I really enjoy it, like watching all the others as well. And so happy to be here today. So big thanks to
All
you.
the credit goes to Johanna. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Really good.
Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Raphael. And tomorrow, actually, for those who don't know, we have another podcast episode. So join too. And see you soon.
Yeah, hopefully see you again and have a good day.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.